But before we get into too much news, we've got to talk about Queensland Premier Giggles Miles. Last week, Steven Miles announced tough emission reduction targets. This week, Steven Miles and his police commissioner caught separate private jets to the same function. It's good to be the king. It's also good to spare no expense when you're the people's representative. The Queensland Premier and his top cop caught separate jets from Brisbane to North Queensland, where they made announcements about fighting crime. And perhaps that's why they took two jets. They were worried one might be stolen. It is Queensland after all. But speaking of which, most Queenslanders live in the south of the state, so perhaps it's Steven Miles' return flight that they'll be most upset about. But really, two private jets to the same function right after you've announced drastic emissions reduction targets. I mean, really? When asked about this, Steven Miles did what all great Labor premiers do. He blamed his staff. He said, and I quote, "We have a team of people whose job is to work out those itineraries, and it was their determination." Great leadership by the Queensland Premier throws his staff under the bus, or the private jet, as it were. Miles is the chef who blames the waiters. But if it was really his team's fault, then doesn't that beg the question, why are there so many people in the Premier's department who hate the planet? Do they want us to go from global boiling to global Armageddon? Now, most of us worked out a long time ago that the whole climate change hysteria is really just that. It's a nonsense. After all, it was only a couple of weeks ago that Anthony Albanese and his climate chicken little Chris Bowen caught separate jets to the same function in order to make, would you believe it, a clean energy announcement. So politicians talk up climate change for votes and for money. It's all a farce. They know it. And we know it, Liz. It's just no one's supposed to say it.
My favourite quote from Miles today was, and I do quote, "Whenever I can, I travel commercial." I'd love to hear from any Queenslander. Please contact us here at Sky News if you've bumped into this guy while travelling cattle class. I doubt there's one of you. And this, the very same day, we learned that the wholesale energy price in Queensland was extortionately higher over summer than anywhere else in the nation. Let me get my figures right. The wholesale spot price increased to 118 megawatts for Queenslanders. Sorry, Queenslanders. For everybody else in the country, the national average was just $76. So while you're forking out 118, everyone else is living it up on 76, which is still extortionately high. And why? Oh, so glad you asked. It's because of their drop in coal-fired power production. So here these guys are. They are the author and finisher of all these U-Butte policies and targets that mean the little people suffer and you guys miss out. This is climate communism. The people at the top aren't doing it hard. You guys can all suffer while we jet around identical routes. These guys took identical route, just like Albo and Bowen did. You'd think that they would have learned a lesson from the amount of ire those two garnered for that move. No. It seems like the Queensland government was just like, hold my beer, we can do you one better. And this time we're just going to do it while we shill for your votes. Please vote for us later this year. We are the leaders to take the state forward. I mean, this is just embarrassing, Caleb.
Well, Bowen and the PM actually come out of this looking quite good because they only went up to the Hunter, right? So this was a 2-day trip that Miles and co took. They went from Brisbane to Townsville, Townsville to Cairns. Then they got up the next morning and they went from Cairns to Townsville, Townsville to Hervey Bay, and then Hervey Bay back to Brisbane. So I thought I should look up what sort of emissions you would create. Two light private jets creates roughly 2 metric tonnes of CO2 on that kind of trip. How long, have a guess, how long do you reckon it takes an average car to put out that amount of CO2? Have a guess.
A year.
6 months. Close enough, right? So driving around for 6 months, that is how long it would take them, and they could have done that trip. You know, I mean, I know Queensland is a vast state.
6 months in an EV.
It would have taken, indeed. I know Queensland is a vast state. It would have taken them a bit longer in a car. But seriously, that is 6 months worth of CO2 emissions from a car that they put out in 2 days flat because they had to take 2 planes. You can't tell me that they couldn't have just got a slightly larger plane to accommodate all the people. Like, sure, you've got to take the Premier and his security entourage, and then you've got a couple of other ministers or whatever tagging along with you. Surely you just get a 20-seater instead of 2 11-seaters or something, because you've only got to fire the engines up once on one plane in order to do that trip.
You heard Max say this is the staff's fault, Caleb.
Well, of course it's the staff.
Miles would have done it totally differently. This is entirely the staff's fault.